Welcome. Thank you for joining us today. If you're on this webinar, you've joined the Leadership, Communities, and Strategic Risk and Resilient Requirements webinar hosted by GRCOM, the Global Resilience Commission, sponsored by the Electric Infrastructure Security Council and our network partners. My name is John Heltzel. I'm the Director for Resilience Planning for the Council, and we appreciate you making time for this event today. I think you're going to be very pleased with the information we're going to provide. We have an outstanding panel of speakers. And again, let's just get right into it. A couple of points. We are recording this session. It will be available in case you have to break away. You will get a link for this recording. You will also get a copy of the slides sent to you later today. As far as questions from the audience, please put those in the questions feature. We will not answer those during the session, but we will make sure we get you a response via email. And we do, again, appreciate you joining us. I'll have more information about the council and the commission at the end of the session, but let's jump into this exciting area, leadership, communities, and strategic risk. Today, our agenda includes Mr. Avi Schnur, who's the president and CEO of the EIS Council, Lord James Arbuthnot, who's going to address challenges and solutions. James has got a long history with the council and a great unique perspective from the UK. Congressman Jim Langevin from Rhode Island is going to give us a national perspective and really talk about the cyber threat and other threats and how we prepare. And then Tony Charge from ARPI, the Australian Risk Policy Institute, is going to talk about some groundbreaking work he's doing in strategic risk policy. So we've got a great agenda, and with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the president and CEO of the EIS Council, Mr. Avi Schnur. Avi?
Hey, thank you, John. Let's go ahead and jump quickly into the slides. I'll try to move forward. So good morning, everyone. I guess it's actually good morning, good afternoon, and it must be the middle of the night in Australia. So very much appreciate everybody's participation. This is truly a global event, as you can certainly see from looking at the panel. And that is quite appropriate because the challenges that we're facing have become global scale challenges. That really represents one of the key lessons learned outside the direct scale of COVID, of the pandemic. You know, beyond the tragedy, beyond all of the learning associated with the dealing with the pandemic itself, one of the primary lessons learned was that all nations, all sectors, all corporations really are heavily interconnected, and the acceleration of that interconnectivity has continued to grow to the point that at this point it is becoming clear to everyone that something needs to be done. So we're dealing with an enormous problem, and part of the problem, part of the fundamentals of the problem is that if you don't ask the right questions, you're going to come up with the wrong solutions. So the right questions in this case really relate to how do we go forward, for example, with restoration. I wanted to throw out something I mentioned in a previous webinar. We talk a lot about restoration, which is an electric sector phenomenon, but of course it's also relevant to all sectors. But restoration on its own has really been bypassed, because today, with the scale of the interconnectivity, if restoration does not explicitly address the critical lifeline infrastructures, then in a severe hazard, what you discover is the restoration is too little too late. Another good example is what the Congressman is going to be speaking about: cybersecurity, supply chain risk management, SCRM. Supply chain risk management is critical, but we're now beginning to understand that it is a subcategory of a broader set that perhaps should be referred to as supply chain fragility. And what we've seen once again with COVID is that we have supply chain issues that occur because of globalization from sector to sector. Major corporations around the world are now beginning to focus on how they can improve the security of their supply chains. Unfortunately, that's probably not going to be enough. Given the scale of the problem, it's going to take a collaborative private and public sector effort to address that. So there is a variety of questions that we need to be addressing, many of which are going to come out of today's discussion. But even to address those questions means we need to take a hard look at our terminology to make sure that we're not dealing with yesterday's questions and yesterday's issues. So what you see on this slide, a few examples. The first one I gave, rather than just restoration, perhaps lifeline compatible restoration, supply chain fragility, perhaps new terms of art. The last one is tools. If there is severe disruption that spans all sectors, for sectors to be connected, they'll require some unique catastrophe optimized tools, we might call them. The great thing is that the resource that we have, the primary resource, is what is always the primary resource. It's the minds of people who really care about this. And when you deal with a problem on this scale, the people who really care tend to be visionary people and people who are natural leaders. And I'm delighted to say that some of the very best, most visionary and responsible leaders across the world, literally from across the world, are with us today for this panel. So finally, the product of all of this, there will be an evolving GRCOM framework, global resilience framework, which will emerge from the best ideas that come out of these panel discussions, parallel discussions. That will be briefed to government agencies, to corporate associations worldwide as it develops. So that's a sort of top-level perspective. And your hosts, of course, EIS Council, I'm sure you know, and a growing array of partners. Thanks again to everyone, and certainly to our panel members for participating. John?
Thank you, Avi. Great opening remarks. We appreciate everybody making time, and we're going to get right into this. It's my pleasure to introduce our facilitator for today and one of our keynote panelists, Lord James Arbuthnot. He's going to fill you in on some outstanding work that he's doing. James?
Hello, John, thanks very much. I'll introduce myself first. I'm the chairman of the new House of Lords Select Committee on Risk Assessment and Risk Planning. I used to be a defense minister in John Major's administration. And after that, sometime after that, I was the chairman of the Defense Select Committee of the House of Commons. And I'm also the chairman of Talis UK's advisory panel. Next slide, please. I'm going to be talking mostly about leadership, a bit about communities, but mostly about leadership, because we have an opportunity right now to do something about the issues which Avi was talking about. The Western world was not prepared for COVID. It was on the risk register of many countries, but still we had to close down our economies. We know we could have done better. More to the point, the public knows that we could have done better. And while their memories are fresh, we need to take advantage of that and to act. And for that, we need leadership. Some of the things we need to think about, we need to think about the economic consequences of COVID. We need to think about the possibility of a resurgent pandemic, all at the same time for the UK at any rate, of the possibility of a no-deal Brexit. In the United States, there is the issue of the dispute over the United States election, and all of this sort of stuff produces uncertainty. But there is more, because those are just the things that we can foresee. We need to be ready for what we can't foresee. Next slide, please. For example, my concern, and it is one of the issues that Avi and John and I have talked about over many years, is our dependence on vulnerable technology. We have a complete dependence on technology, all of which requires electricity. And that electricity is vulnerable, for example, to solar flares. to cyber attack, which Congressman Langevin is going to talk about, to other man-made and natural threats. And all of these threats come with the complication of the effect of cascade. As we've seen in the UK, if you keep children out of school, at least one parent can't go to work, which may disrupt the parent's essential job, which may be the security of the food supply chain, it may be the police force, it may be being a school teacher, which knocks onto other things in unpredictable ways. So without electricity, we would revert, in my view, not to the Dark Ages, but to the Stone Age, because we wouldn't have horses and carts, because in the Dark Ages they did. We'd have eaten all the horses before we realized how essential they were to human survival. Now, I'm aware of the fact this all makes me sound a bit like a gloom monger. I was once described in the Times as making Eeyore look like a happy clappy type, but unless our leaders think about possible risks, we won't be able to deal with them. And it's why in centuries past people carried guns. It's the principle behind insurance. It's why we now wear masks on public transport to avoid risk. Next slide, please. So we need leadership. We need imaginative leadership, because all too many leaders lack imagination. It's hard to imagine events that you haven't experienced yourself. It's even harder if nobody else has either. But technology is constantly bringing change which is accelerating. So the past has become a poor guide to the future. Recently, someone said, the past is our guide to the future until the present makes it clear that we're walking backwards. And some of our technology is so powerful that if we experience it just once, humankind might no longer exist. This wasn't true until the invention of nuclear, but now it's true about a range of technologies. So guarding against only those risks that we have experienced is not going to work. Next slide, please. And better prediction is not the answer either. We never have predicted the things that we have, for example, the wars that we've founded ourselves in. In the UK, we did predict a pandemic, but we predicted a flu pandemic. And that was useless because the predicted worst case scenario for a flu pandemic was that we would suffer up to 100 deaths. We are now 600 times that. So we need to guard against those risks that we have neither experienced nor predicted. You want to make yourselves, your families, your businesses, your countries more resilient. And resilience means the ability to survive, if possible, the ability to prosper in the face of things that are thrown at you. So the first question is, what's going to be thrown at you? And the answer is, I don't know. You don't know. And oddest and most important, it really doesn't matter. Next slide, please. Because resilience comes not from experience or prediction, but from being flexible and agile, responding, able to respond to unpredictable things, flexibility and agility of supply chains, of labor force, of finance. So if you can diversify your supply chains and your labor force, then do so. If you can ensure that you always have enough money set by for a rainy day, then do so. If you're tempted to go down the route of lean manufacturing, then remember that it comes with a cost. The leaner your processes, the less robust and resilient they are. In recent years, we've done wonders for efficiency, but it has been at the expense of resilience. So build in a degree of redundancy. Just in time is fine while everything is working well, but at a time of crisis, it might put the very existence of your business in jeopardy. Next slide, please. And one of the most important things is the flexibility of thinking. In order to have flexibility of thought. You need diversity, diversity of the sources of thought, which means diversity of the thinkers. Are all your strategists from the same type of background? Then move some of them out and get in some fresh blood. Are they all men? Change some of them. Are they all positive thinkers? Well, that's wonderful, but they shouldn't be. John Moulton, the venture capitalist, talks about the need to have on company boards an appropriate mixture of Tiggers and Eeyores. He's a good man. I'm a proud Eeyore. So in answer to Boris Johnson's attacks on doomsters and gloomsters, they do have their place. Without doomsters and gloomsters, we'd never take out fire insurance. Next slide, please. So how do we encourage this admirable behavior of flexibility and agility? We can regulate, but that's not enough. There's resistance to that from the business sector, yet more rules to follow. There's resistance from government. They want to keep in with the business sector. They want to deregulate. Government is not confident that it knows better than the business sector. We can introduce standards, but that is tick box mentalities. Principles actually work better than standards, provided people follow them. But next slide, please. What I suggest we need is incentives. Can we somehow harness the power of the market so that it pays people to become resilient? And if so, how? I confess, I don't have an answer to that question, but I'm looking for one. So if you can possibly help, I'd be extremely grateful. Does insurance have a role to play here? Can we organize for insurance premiums to be based not on whatever the market will bear, but on good behavior, the behavior of the insured? We can do it with burglaries. If you leave your door unlocked, the insurance company won't pay out on the insurance policy. So you behave better. Maybe if you have a full resilience plan, which you practice, you will lower your insurance policies. Or how about relational contracts, whereby everyone in a transaction benefits from the resilience of everybody else in that contract? How can we persuade people to regard resilience as an asset rather than a cost? There's lots of money to be made from resilience. My suggestion is let it be made by you. Next slide, please. And I'll just say a final word about communities. All the studies show that true resilience comes not from your equipment, not even from your knowledge or training, but from having a resilient community around you. COVID has energized an interest in resilience, but you won't get truly resilient communities unless there is public awareness of vulnerabilities, which comes from public discussion of vulnerabilities and solutions, public involvement in those solutions, public exercises involving the whole communities. There are countries that do this, for example, in Scandinavia, and we need to learn from them. And that's enough from me. So now I'm going to pass on to Congressman Langevin, chair of the Subcommittee on Intelligence and Emerging Threats and Capabilities, and member of the House Committee on Armed Services from the great state of Rhode Island. Congressman, over to you.
Very good, James. Thank you very much, and good morning to all. Maybe afternoon where you are, but great to be with you today. And I certainly enjoyed your talk. And let me also just say that I am a big fan of NCSC and Kieran Martin and his leadership. I know that Kieran has moved on to other things right now, but I have to say that I've been a fan of what Great Britain has been able to accomplish on ensuring stronger cybersecurity, and so great to be following you today, James. So let me just say it's really an honor for me to be with everyone today, and I want to thank you for inviting me. It really is indeed an honor to join this distinguished panel. For a member of Congress, I have to say that there's no more important topic than addressing strategic level risk to society, especially when you're talking about national security issues. And the perspective I bring stems from over a decade of work on one of the major problems that has emerged in the information age, and our infrastructure, information infrastructure, is vulnerable to cyber attack. This has become evident and is now acknowledged up and down the national security supply chain and infrastructure, if you will. This is not news to anybody by now. Of course, we read about ransomware, cyber espionage, influence operations, and novel other types of cyber operations almost every day now. So the question is, what are we doing about it? Well, in the next few minutes, I'm going to offer a few specific examples of progress that we're making toward managing strategic risk in cyberspace through community building, through planning for resilience, and by provisioning effective leadership. So the topic of cybersecurity, I'd say for myself, first grabbed my attention about 12 or 13 years ago. In 2007, an experiment at one of our U.S. national labs by a couple of our scientists had uncovered and in fact demonstrated that a piece of malicious software could physically destroy a power generator. It was the first time where I saw how physical damage could actually be accomplished and cause damage through a cyber attack. So basically, I realized that the cyber risk was not merely one of inconvenience, but a systemic and strategic risk to society. We really envisioned at the time that perhaps a whole sector of the country's electric grid could be brought down by through a cyber attack, through cyber intrusion, and it was eye-opening and quite riveting. You think about it; these generators are not just sitting on a shelf somewhere where you can just pop one out like a battery and put a new one in. They take months to build, ship, and install. So having the country's electric grid or a whole sector of it go down in the dead of winter could cause not only great damage to our economy, but also could cause loss of life. So some of my colleagues at the time thought I was a bit of an alarmist. I'll be quite frank. I think some were thinking I should wear a tinfoil hat, and I got a lot of funny looks at the time when I was so concerned about the issue of cybersecurity. But I pressed forward, and I wasn't alone. And thankfully, through persistence, Representative Michael McCall, my colleague, my Republican colleague, who is the ranking member of the subcommittee that I chaired at the time, that had jurisdiction over cyber. He and I worked very closely together, and he and I co-founded the Congressional Cybersecurity Caucus. So by 2018, the cyber threat was widely recognized as a national security issue. From the president on down to the entire national security apparatus. And Congress formed in response the Cyberspace Solarium Commission to develop a strategic approach for the country. So I was one of the 4 members of Congress to serve on the Solarium Commission, along with 4 members of the executive branch and 6 private sector experts in this field. Our goal was to produce a report that would not just sit on a shelf. We were determined that this would be something meaningful, something actionable, that we would actually see concrete results come as a result. So we developed from this report that we issued after a year-long study thereabouts this past March. We issued our findings, and we developed over 80 recommendations organized along basically 6 themes. Of course, as with any legislative body, it's going to take Congress several years to refine and enact the legislative proposals that we came up with. But we've had great success in the current congressional session at getting high priority provisions into the National Defense Authorization Act. And we are putting the finishing touches right now on the NDAA, which we believe will actually be reported out later this afternoon or this evening. And we hope to take it up and pass it next week. So I'm very excited about this happening right now. So let me touch on a few of the provisions. First, let's consider the critical role of community building, which is, I know, an important topic that we want to look at today. The Solarium Commission recognized that cyber risk applies not just to individual computers or companies, but at a systemic level. And therefore, it's essential that we build, strengthen, and empower communities for the common defense. So, so what are we doing about that? Well, for one thing, we are strengthening public-private partnerships. In the federal government, we often think of cybersecurity in terms of 16 sectors to provide essential services and form the backbone of the nation's economy, security and health. Each of the sectors falls under a federal agency responsible for that industry or activity. For example, the Department of Energy is responsible for the energy infrastructure sector. Well, new legislation formalizes the roles and responsibilities of these sector risk management agencies individually and establishes the Department of Homeland Security, Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, role in coordinating among them. So we chose to empower the sector risk management agencies because we know that the expertise lies with the owners and operators closest to the ground. So we need to strengthen these ties between the risk managers at CISA and the practitioners on the front lines if we are to have a truly whole of nation effort to defend ourselves in cyberspace. So through legislation and in cooperation with the executive branch, we are able to guide and enable CISA to foster sector risk management communities by establishing forums, mechanisms, incentives, and resources for them to learn and cooperate with one another. So second, I believe that we have to take a systemic approach to resilience. So the Solarium Commission recognizes that even the most diligent prevention efforts cannot guarantee that we will not be subjected to a severe cyber incident. Infrastructure disruptions, whether caused by a cyber operation, a natural disaster, or a pandemic, can happen, and they may well happen at any time. So what are we doing about that? Well, we're taking concrete measures to establish resilience, and so resilience in our mind really means that even if our normal means of production and commerce and communication are subjected to systemic disruption, the disruptions are not catastrophic. So we achieve resilience in three ways: by planning, by allocating and pre-positioning resources, and by adjusting the structure of dependencies. A very important Solarium provision contained in our current defense bill is called continuity of economy planning, or COPE. That's continuity of economy planning for short, and that's the COPE for short. So continuity of economy planning requires the president to plan in advance and put in place processes and resources to support critical infrastructure. So, for example, this planning involves putting aside strategic reserves and diversifying supply chains. So in addition to stockpiling of raw materials and industrial goods, we should be backing up data in offline, uncorruptible formats. We should consider maintaining fallback technology, including analog, and we should be prepared to extend emergency financial credit to keep the banking system functioning in the event of a national emergency. So I should note that these are lessons well learned from the COVID pandemic that we're facing right now. We knew a global pandemic could come, and we had actually done some modicum of planning, but we had not adequately, obviously, stockpiled things like PPE, and we were certainly overly reliant on narrow supply chains. So there is a deeper lesson here too. Resilience and efficiency are sometimes at odds. Resilience involves redundancies and frictions that are not the cheapest path in the short term, but are there for the greater health and stability of the system against shocks and in the future. So making these trade-offs is not always easy, and it's certainly not always cheap. But we really do need to do planning to understand what the trade-offs are. We have to make investments where needed, and most importantly, not get caught flat-footed. So third, we all know that leadership is obviously critical. Effective leadership depends on talent, but talent alone is not enough. We need to take deliberate steps to enable good people to be effective in their leadership by empowering them. So the Solarium Commission came to recognize that responsibility for cybersecurity is distributed right now over a multitude of agencies, with nobody really per se in charge. This leads to duplication of effort for some activities and gaps in others. So we came to the conclusion here that there needs to be a coordination across agencies led by the White House, where ultimate executive authority lies. So here, what are we doing about that? Well, we wrote a provision into the NDAA to establish a Senate-confirmed national cyber director in the White House. By raising leadership, this leadership position to such a level, Congress is acting to ensure that the responsibility for cybersecurity is taken seriously by each and every presidential administration, not just at their whim as to when it should be important, but across presidential elections and across administrations, that it would always be taken seriously. So we're empowering an individual to break down silos and cut through red tape to ensure that risks are mitigated early when we have the most leverage. So, one of my colleagues calls this one throat to choke, if you will, when things go wrong too. So holding someone accountable. So in closing, I believe the Global Resilience Commission is on the right track by encouraging these three strategies that have been articulated in the conference and that we're embracing with respect to cybersecurity. We are creating institutions to house and encourage community action. We are directing that planning, resource allocation, and structural economic adjustments are factored into the need for resilience, and we are taking formal steps to provision leadership positions. So these measures, I believe, will bring a safer and a more secure world, not only with respect to cybersecurity, but with all aspects of systemic risk. So thank you for having me here today. It's been great being with you, and look forward to some Q&A later in the session. Thank you.
Jim, thank you very much indeed. That was fantastic. And I do want to commend to the whole of the world the work that the Solarium did. I think it was outstanding. And now moving on, I want to introduce, if I may, Tony Charge from the Australian Risk Policy Institute. Tony has been leading the effort on strategic risk policy. Tony, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning from Australia. Yeah, RP is an independent educator. Our purpose is solely to promote risk policy and to connect leaders with resilient risk.
Tony, I'm afraid we're having a bit of problem with your audio. Are you able to perhaps move a bit or something?
Hopefully that is clear.
It's unfortunate, James. I don't think we're going to be able to get Tony to do his presentation today. In the interest of time, what we'll do is Tony and I will record his session and make it part of the final videos that are available when we've got better connectivity. If I could suggest, for the interest of time, why don't we go ahead and move to the question and answer session with the Congressman, and we'll just take advantage of his willingness to answer questions, and you can comment back to him. How does that sound?
Okay. Congressman Langevin, it's you and me.
Yes,
And Tony,
it's now been restored.
Tony, we miss you, but John's solution will be the answer, and it will be distributed to everyone who's on the call. Jim, if I may ask you, you said that your committee had also been examining impacts on the global supply chain. That is a key issue. What were the main resilience issues or threats that you uncovered in your work on the global supply chain?
Yeah, so supply chain, as we became certainly acutely aware of, if you will, during COVID, shows how vulnerable we are when we're relying too much on say countries or people or entities that are outside of your control. And it became very acutely aware that how important supply chain is. But as respect to cyber, the Civilian Commission identified cyber chain risk management certainly as an important part of reshaping our cyber ecosystem. In October, the Commission released an addendum white paper specifically about building a trusted supply chain for the information and communications and technology sector. So this white paper basically lays out what we want to see in a strategy and proposes 5 key recommendations plus 8 supporting recommendations. These recommendations basically address 3 intersecting risk, if you will. So the availability of raw materials and intermediate goods and finished products, the security and trustworthiness of equipment, and America's economic competitiveness and innovation in an age of global markets. So this is something that surely has all of our attention right now on supply chain issues for so many different reasons. And but certainly cyber and supply chain risk management is something we need to pay closer attention to.
Have you read the book Ghost Fleet?
As a matter of fact, I'm reading it now. It's a great book, and yes, I'm familiar with.
It's a very important premise that the chips on which we rely are often made in countries which are not necessarily our greatest supporters, and we need to learn lessons from that. And that goes to the security and trust, the second limb of what you were saying just now.
I'm sorry, say that again. Well, I think Tony was trying to comment there, if I'm not mistaken.
I think we're just going to drive ahead. The connection doesn't seem to be stable. So, James, any more questions for the Congressman?
Oh yes, plenty. The question that I'd next like to ask you, Congressman, is what role do you think in securing a supply chain is there for outsiders, penetration testing, outsiders validating the security or whatever of the supply chain? Do you think that there is a role for outsiders?
Well, certainly working with partners and allies, that's for sure, is something that we should look at. Let me just say some strategic recommendations. We really should develop a comprehensive catalog of key technologies and equipment that comprise the information and communications technology infrastructure. So what are the components and who makes them? What are the raw materials? And how are these transformed and into finished goods, if you will. Get a full understanding of these relationships really is critical to making sure all bases are covered. Again, it's one thing if these materials and technologies are coming from trusted partners and allies, think of the Five Eyes countries, if you will. I'd feel much more comfortable relying on that type of supply chain than I would if we had key components coming from outside of trusted partnership, maybe from enemies or adversaries, if you will, which is quite a paradox right now, if you will, and a bit ironic. But we need coordinated center within the executive branch that is responsible for assembling and tracking this information. We also need to ensure minimum viable high-tech technology capacity here at home. So you're identifying things like locations around the United States to become economic clusters for research, development, manufacturing, and assembly of chips and end products, if you will. Too much of our technology right now relies on China, quite frankly, and that's really concerning in a number of ways. We can see rising global competition, certainly between the United States and China, between many of our allies and China, and China will become a greater competitor on the economic and the military front going forward. So an industrial-based strategy right now, it can include things like R&D investment consortiums and companies that allow them to coordinate without violating antitrust laws and the jurisdictions of trade zones and tax incentives. Just to name a couple of examples. And I can talk about other things like what we need to do to mitigate this or to stimulate domestic markets if you'd like. But those are some of the highlights.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's a great answer. There's also a classic catch-22 issue with resilient spending. If you are effective as a leader and you spend the right amount on resilient spending, then nobody will ever see that you did that because it was effective. And whatever catastrophe it was that you were defending against will not have come to pass. It will not have come to pass. And so you won't get the credit for it because nobody sees it. But if you spend too little, then the catastrophe will come to pass and people will blame you for having done so. How would you advise business leaders or political leaders, for that matter, to get round that catch-22?
Yeah, the way I would do that is through what I call having cybermetrics established. Right now, you are right in that it's sort of hard to prove a negative right now, and quite frankly, many of the cybersecurity technologies and tools that we put in place, we think that they are the right things to do. I think a lot of CISOs will say, well, I believe it's going to make us more secure. But I've often asked the question, well, how do we know? And the answer is right now, we don't have adequate metrics and statistics to prove what makes us that much more cyber secure. So one of the things that we've called for in the Cyber Solarium Commission findings is the creation of a Bureau of Cyber Statistics. So we would have anonymized data that could be used to evaluate not only best practices, but also the technologies that are used that would help us make us that much more cyber secure. We have what's called the adoption of the NIST framework here in the United States, and it's recommended that companies adopt the NIST framework. But I've often asked, okay, if every company does that, or if a company does that, does that make them as secure as they possibly can be? How much more cyber secure are they? And their answer is we really don't know yet. So what I would say, that creating the Bureau of Cyber Statistics will help us to evaluate those technologies so that then we can also, it helps CISOs make the business case, or a CEO make the business case, say to the board, about why we need to invest in and employ these types of technologies, because we can quantify it. We can say it's going to make us X factor more secure if we adapt, say, two-factor authentication, just by way of example.
That's an interesting point. How do you get these often technical, complicated questions to the board, which may not naturally understand what the questions actually are or what the answers should be?
Yes, and so here's, I kind of have a litmus test whenever I'm speaking to a CEO and I want to gauge their level of awareness of cybersecurity threats. Or how are they taking robust steps to ensure that the company is secure as they can be? And I'll often ask the question, so do you have a CISO and a CIO? Who does this, if they have a CISO, that's a good answer. But more equally importantly, what's the reporting like? Does the CISO report to the CIO only, or is they say dual reporting to the CISO and the CEO? And does the board have reach back to cyber experts, or to the CISO to be aware of the cyber challenges? So we want to empower certainly the CISO to have the tools that they need to make the business case. We want the CEO to be able to evaluate these on both the technology and a business case, and that's why having that type of data, and that from, say, a Bureau of Cyber Statistics could provide, will help to quantify and make the business case.
That's a great answer. Thanks. Can I move on to an issue of cyber criminals? On the dark web, cyber criminals often pool their knowledge, pool their resources, and they become stronger by doing so. Companies, on the other hand, tend not to pool their knowledge because they don't want to give away their trade secrets to their competitors. They are often reluctant to display vulnerabilities, even to government, let alone to other companies or their competitors. How do we get round that inbuilt advantage for cyber criminals?
Yeah, they certainly do have an advantage in so many ways, and they just have to be right once. We have to be right, in a sense, all the time, instead of any age-old security question or issue. And so we have to get to a point where there's greater collaboration and partnerships between security and the private sector. I've often touted the importance of the public-private partnership, and one of the things that we called for in the Cybersecurity Commission is the creation of this joint collaborative environment. We are basically members of the key members in the intelligence community, working side by side with key people in the private sector. Think, in terms of private sector critical infrastructure, mainly the most sensitive areas of our society and the business world that we rely on. So the banking system, the electric grid, telecommunications, and being able to have in a classified environment where we could put context to what both the IC and what the private sector are seeing, so that we're much more in tune to the threats that are out there. But also, by the way, I'll talk about the need to call out bad actors. Maybe I'm digressing a little bit or going off on another area, but I do want to say that we need to create norms in cyberspace, and being able to work together collaboratively in the international community to call out bad actors, or those, say, countries that are housing bad actors that are violating norms in cyberspace, and then being willing to move quickly with agility to condemn that action and hold individuals accountable. Those are things that, and we may not ever have perfect information, but I think that using things like all source intelligence we can connect enough of the dots to know that, yes, those are the bad actors. That's who we believe is responsible, and call them out. If I could, just on another example, but unrelated, the Skripal poisoning that occurred. Right now, obviously not a cyber incident, but it was a case where the international community didn't have perfect information about who was responsible for the Skripal poisoning. But the international community, with using all source intelligence, pulled together enough information to identify Russia as the culprits, and called them out and impose sanctions to punish them, saying that type of behavior on foreign soil and on our soil in Great Britain is not going to be tolerated, and we were going to hold Russia accountable because of it. We need to apply that same kind of concept to holding bad actors accountable in cyberspace, and moving with a greater agility to do that.
Well, from a British point of view, can I say that we were enormously encouraged by the international response and reaction to the Skripal poisoning. And I'd like to say thank you from the UK point of view to those countries, including the United States and Australia, but many others across Europe, particularly for their response to it. It was most encouraging. The question of attribution, though, is even harder with cyber attacks, isn't it? Because often the attribution can only be made onto a computer which will have been destroyed or dropped at the bottom of the Atlantic or whatever. So that creates real difficulties, doesn't it?
It does, but I will say this, and it makes it more challenging too when nation states employ proxies and such. But you think of what the IRA did with respect to the Russians and how they try to interfere with the U.S. elections. But we were using all source intelligence. We have to get out of the the mindset of thinking that we only will use cyber forensics to prove cyber bad actors are responsible. Instead, using all source intelligence where we can identify the bad actors with enough degree of certainty or confidence level that we feel confident in being able to respond and being able to take action.
Yeah. Okay. One final question. Do you have one piece of advice to advance our resilience goals?
Yeah. So I would say that we probably need a more of a public awareness campaign among the public to recognize that they have a role to play. We all have a role to play in cybersecurity. And I've kind of joked around and said that we need a Smokey the Bear campaign for cybersecurity, that only you can prevent forest fires. Well, really only you can, we can, as individuals, can help to prevent cyber intrusions. If we're practicing things like good cyber hygiene and have a strong password on our computers, we're updating our security patches, not clicking on malicious links or downloading malware. That'll go a long way toward building in resilience. But it does take constant refreshers and knowledge for the general public to realize that they are a part of the equation, the big part, to make us all more cyber secure.
I entirely agree, and I'm very pleased that you make that very important point. Can I say, Congressman Langevin, thank you very much indeed for joining in this and for being cross-examined rather more than you were expecting to be. But I'd also like to thank Tony Charge, who got up at an ungodly hour of the morning and then was frustrated from coming on. Even without him, though, it's been a great session, and I'd like to say thank you very much indeed. And John, I'm now handing it back to you.
Thank you,
gentlemen, thank you both. And what we'll do is we will record Tony's session and attach it So we will get there. But again, thanks for your time. Outstanding comments. Congressman, I know we asked you a few more questions than we planned on, but you were a champ. Those are great answers, and those will actually make it into our upcoming documents. So thank you again.
Thank you. Great to be with you. And thanks for James for doing such a great job in the Q&A.
Outstanding. He's got a role in the future if he shows support. Just a few things for everybody as we wind down here. You've been attending one of the Global Resilience Commission webinars. These webinars are going to continue going into the future, but also in January, we're going to release a number of documents. And if you're interested in these documents or you want to be part of where we're going with the commission, feel free to reach out to us. You've got my email, and we're doing some work on our website, then you'll be able to contact us through that. But to be noted, the actual resilience framework that Avi talked about, a version 1 of that document will be available late in January. We'll be sending it out for public comment, and we hope you all will become members and partners of the commission and help us continually make that better. A hallmark piece of work that's been undergoing creation for at least 3 years now is the EPRO Electromagnetic Pulse Handbook, another handbook to add to the council's portfolio of really groundbreaking work on resilience in specific sectors that need to be accomplished. I'd also be wrong to not call out another document that we've already gotten tremendous feedback, and we're going to move it into final version 1 mode and make it available to the public in January on resilience guidelines for one of the most important sectors, we think, the electric industry. And then finally, I mentioned that you're going to get some information from me on membership, partnerships, and sponsorships. So more to come on that, but we do appreciate everybody making time and giving us your great ideas. The congressman did a great job highlighting some areas that we can move forward. And then obviously, Lord Arbuthnot set us up for success with some very direct information on leadership requirements that we will double down on and embed them into some of our future events. So if you're a calendar kind of person, you might want to make note that our next event will be on Wednesday, the 21st of January, 11 o'clock. This is actually going to be a hallmark event on electromagnetic pulse, both understanding the risks and developing achievable resilience requirements. And for the first time following that session, we will open up the EMP Resilience Forum. In the future, our webinar series will have a companion event where after the formal presentation, we'll take a very short break for coffee and refreshment, and then come back. And we're actually going to have an ongoing dialogue where you can submit questions, and we'll have our panelists and our sponsors and our partners online to be able to engage with those questions. So it's something new for us. I hope that sounds exciting to you. It sounds exciting to us, and it'll be a great way for you to extend your knowledge and also make some relationships going forward for your own resilience adventure. So with that being said, again, my name is John Heltzel. You have my email address, I'm sure, from the updates, but if not, you can find me on the EIS Council website. I want to thank you all for being with us throughout the year on the number of webinars that we've had. To be noted, EarthX will continue in 2021, and we'll get more information to you after the first of the year. But for that, we'll take a short break in the rest of December, and we'll be back in January. Again, my thanks to all our panelists for some outstanding comments, and we will be publishing the notes from this session as well. Take care, have a great holiday season, and thanks for joining us, and look forward to the video version of Tony's presentation as soon as he and I can record it. Take care.